This is how you keep your pool fresh. Brandon, the client, hurled beer at me. His personality was the worst. I've had enough of the people from his company throwing beer at me. How much more bother must he give us before he's satisfied? Our organization experienced a difficult period as a result of Brandon, and the staff members he deceived were also facing difficulties. I was always so angry thinking about Brandon, how self-centered. I made the decision to avenge him. Then the deal for $200 million is off, effective immediately. I held my phone up to make sure he could clearly hear the playback because he appeared perplexed. After hearing the recorded words, Brandon's demeanor completely altered, and he began to apologize. That being said, I ignored him. Whatever he said, I was not going to forgive Brandon. Alex Johnson is my name, and this year I will be 32. I am the CEO of a firm that manufactures high-end watches. My business has expanded quickly since we had great success with our own line of timepieces. I'm happy with my employment, even though it's a difficult profession that also pays well. My interest in this work stems from an event that happened in my early years. My grandfather was a really special man, and one day his big old clock broke. Since he was a young boy, my grandfather has held the clock in high regard. He attempted to restore it by taking it to a few different repair shops, but sadly, his efforts were unsuccessful. It was too old, and in the end, nobody could fix the clock. I wanted to fix the broken clock after seeing my grandfather's dejected expression. I'll become someone who can fix any clock when I grow up. Is that accurate? You're sweet, Alex, but I'm not in any danger. Follow your own aspirations. After a few years, I found myself employed in the watch business, but I was never able to fix that old clock, so it now peacefully rests in a corner of my home. One of my greatest regrets is that I was unable to show my grandfather the working clock once more after he passed away when I was 20 years old. It was not quite noon. I was heading to the reception area, having just left the CEO's office. Along the way, I noticed worn-out workers from various departments conversing in the hallway. Scenes like these were becoming routine for the organization. Employees from different departments wouldn't normally interact much, but because of the staffing shortage, this was now a common occurrence. All of this occurred as a result of the termination of one employee, Brandon, a few months prior, for deceiving multiple coworkers and forcing them to resign. An attractive man in his 50s, Brandon constantly showed off his wealth with elaborate watches and ties. His attitude at work was much worse than that of other employees, which resulted in his termination. But after he was sacked, Brandon assured some of our brightest workers that he would give them greater chances at other businesses. Consequently, a number of workers accepted his word for it and departed the organization. Due to the significant staff shortage that resulted, several employees were forced to take on extra responsibilities from other departments. After a long trek, I sighed when I reached the reception area. It appears that the client I was meant to meet with at this time has not yet shown up. I spoke with a male employee who had made coffee in the room while making sure there were no outside guests. It seems our client hasn't arrived yet, Jess. They called a short while ago to say they'd be about 5 minutes late, so it might take a bit longer. Even as the president of this company, I cannot afford to take it easy because we are now experiencing a staff shortage. I'm performing the tasks that the sales department would typically complete because of this. However, I'm starting to get tired of it, presumably from being so busy lately covering for others at the production plant, assisting with marketing and public relations, and so forth. Leave me to relax on the sofa. I'm a little tired. Kindly ignore me and carry on with your task. Oh yes, understood. Exhaustion overcame me as I settled into the reception room sofa and closed my eyes. I closed my eyes and thought back to several things that had happened recently. The firm wouldn't be in this predicament if it weren't for Brandon. As it happens, the workers who left after being persuaded by Brandon's claims were unable to obtain jobs at the purportedly better firm. The people who were tricked were unable to rejoin our organization and appear to be having difficulty finding new employment. Despite my sympathy for their predicament and the fact that it's their decision to leave their place of employment, I was unable to simply offer assistance given the company's reputation. I therefore intend to hire a diverse spectrum of people while I am seeking out new talent. This calls for further planning and probably busier days in the future. The man who had been in the reception area shouted out to me while I was thinking about the future. While I was sleeping, he appeared to have been talking on the phone with someone. It appears that the client has just arrived, President Johnson. I've arranged all of the deal's paperwork on the table. Comprehensive. I appreciate you getting things ready. We're really busy, so it can be difficult, but persevere until we can bring on some more employees. Yes. A few minutes later, the client showed up in the room after the employee was sent off with a perceptive response. I got up from the couch to say hello, but something stopped me. I was not anticipating the man who walked in, despite his flashy attire. The man with the gold tie was showing off a high-end watch that he was wearing. In addition, his wallet, which was visible through his open briefcase, was obviously a fancy brand, and his tie included an unusually huge gemstone. Even though his appearance and belongings were shocking, they didn't really matter. The fact that the man was Brandon, who had left the organization a few months prior, shocked me the most. I was somewhat perplexed by this unexpected turn of events, but as the CEO of a corporation, I couldn't afford to ponder. I inhaled deeply to center myself before looking back at Brandon. Brandon, why are you here? It's apparent, isn't it? Now that I'm in command of this arrangement, is that something you can comprehend? Well, perhaps your intellect is too slow to keep up because you can't even afford a good lunch because you're poor. I wanted to run away from reality after hearing his impolite introductory words, but I put up with it for the benefit of the group. Maybe this would be easy for someone who eats steak every day because of his wife's money, but it was a little difficult for us common people to understand. Is that meant to be ironic? Poverty, it seems, makes even the sting of defeat seem insignificant with a sneer. He has been looking down on me and calling me poor, maybe since I showed up when I fired Brandon with a raggedy towel. Putting that aside, I needed something to wipe off my perspiration that day because the air conditioning wasn't working properly. It was simply something I carried with me to get through the intense heat until the repair service could come. However, I never imagined that would be enough to earn me the title of poor. He must have thought that I was really impoverished and could not even afford to eat tomorrow. Brandon appears to think of himself as wealthy, unlike me. Using his wife's earnings, he indulges in luxury, purchasing new cars and having steak for breakfast. It appears that he used to brag to his coworkers about these kinds of activities. Even though it's his wife's money, he doesn't appear to be ashamed to boast about it. Thus, in a low voice that Brandon didn't appear to hear, I said, "It's not like you earned it yourself." "What was that? Have you made any comments?" "No, it's nothing." Taking the casual step inside the reception area, Brandon settled down on the couch. He leaned back, crossed his legs, and signaled to me to take a seat. I retreated to the sofa because I was exhausted. I couldn't just stand there the entire time, but I also couldn't have a peaceful conversation with Brandon. "A long time has passed. I've been missing your face for months," he murmured. To keep from getting angry, I had to approach this like I would have a nonverbal child, with patience, not like I was interacting with another person. "Are you doing sales work at your new company, just like you did here?" I inquired. "Yes, I'm enforcing discipline there in my capacity as a manager. I've been able to work more freely because there aren't any rule sticklers here." There was no hint of regret or repentance in his statements. I'm sure he's still behaving selfishly at his new job. This gave me confidence that firing him was the right move. Had someone such as Brandon stayed on staff, it would have contaminated the organization and impacted other employees as well. Yes, it was a wiser decision to fire him sooner rather than later. But I never would have guessed that he would lie to other workers and hurt the firm so badly. In addition, What about the other people that departed at roughly the same time as me? Have they returned to your business? He asked, sounding a little innocent. I shook my head, forcing the ache I was feeling to subside. Obviously not. It's not as easy as firing someone and then hiring them again. That's right, he said with a sly laugh and a supposedly amused hand clap. I had absolutely no idea how Brandon was feeling. I opted to move on to the main topic after asking what I wanted to know and not wanting to go into any more personal conversation that might distress me. Let's switch gears then and move on to the discussion about our deal. We then carried on with the business talk after that. He commented, "You look pretty tired," as we were coming to an end of our talk. He was looking at me closely. I am aware of the shortage of employees. It has to be difficult. Seeing the CEO of my old company in this state makes me sad. He smiled mockingly as he departed the reception area, despite his statements. I beat my fist against the table in front of me out of frustration. Brandon most likely came to see how the business was doing. To come here, he must have had someone else trade places with him. I felt nauseated at the idea of his malice in combining personal grudges with business. I got back to my flat around midnight after work and went straight to the antique clock in the corner. I took some items from my family's house, where I used to live before moving out on my own, to make me feel less homesick. It comforts and reassures me just to gaze at and touch these cherished childhood pieces of furniture. Upon closer examination, I saw stickers from candy wrappers put on them and lines marked with a marker representing my development spurts. Observing these remnants of my former existence brings back memories of my parents, who observed my development, and my mother, who would always buy me candies on her way home from the store. Once I had indulged in a little nostalgia, I looked at my grandfather's old clock. With the exception of the antique clock, which is the only piece of non-functional furniture I brought, the clothing and table are all in working order. It no longer serves as a timepiece and is now just there in the room's corner. I attempt a lot of different ways to fix it when I have time to spare, but it stays still. When I touch the ancient clock, my grandfather's boyhood memories rush back to me. I can think back on my life and how I've lived it when I look at this clock and consider time. Actually, in what way? Whether I've lived a life I'm proud of, if I've made worthwhile use of my time, and so on. The best thing about clocks, in my opinion, is that they allow you to take stock of who you are. My grandfather had a soft way of gazing at the clock, and I adored him for it. These recollections gave me hope, and I was inspired to tackle tomorrow with newfound vigor. I heard my cell phone's ringtone while I was getting ready. It was an email sent by a company employee. The year-end party of the corporation was referenced in the content. The location appeared to have changed somewhat from the previous year. It appears that Brandon's workplace is close to the new location. I instantly replied to the email after shaking my mind to get rid of any bad ideas. It appears that I had gotten another email from someone in the sales department during that period. Upon perusing the contents, I couldn't suppress a shocked outburst. What a scandal this is. The email described a scandal involving a business that we had thought to be a trustworthy partner. In situations like this, my firm's course of action is obvious. Cooperating with a company that is involved in a controversy should obviously end right away, as it could endanger us. Still, I had a hard time believing that such an act had happened. I gave someone from the relevant company a call. This company was a major commercial partner of ours. It was a retailer of luxury watches. It was a business that had never previously produced any significant problems. Emily, I think, was in command. Emily, a lady in her 50s who was renowned for her honesty and earnestness, was in charge of our commercial transaction. I have had a few encounters with her as well, since I have been filling in for the sales department. One day, when Emily was working in our reception area, a worker who was making coffee passed out. I was unable to move right away due to the numbness in my leg, but Emily graciously offered to handle things in my place. I therefore found it difficult to accept that a business employing someone like her could be connected to a controversy. She said that a new hire had embezzled corporate monies and given them to a shadowy organization. Although they have a strict hiring procedure normally, this person was employed by a temporary employee, which gave the company access to someone with a questionable background. I couldn't hold it against my firm because we're going through a similar problem with replacements right now. Emily and I then had a lengthy conversation before hanging up. It's amusing in retrospect that this episode would eventually lead to revenge against Brandon, demonstrating the capricious nature of fate. It was already several weeks later. It was now the day of the year-end celebration, and I was seated at a corner table inside a bar. I had just completed looking over the list of attendees. It had been an hour since the beginning, and the staff, now intoxicated, were having a good time. A few had departed early because they had other commitments or were feeling under the weather, so the total was slightly smaller at first. I was concerned because I remembered a worker who had passed out in front of the bar the previous year from heavy drinking. Though thankfully there were no significant problems or thefts, it was nonetheless a scary moment. It could be a good idea to look about to make sure nothing similar happened. I said to a secretary nearby that I was going outside. Then I got a towel fast from the secretary. It's a little uncomfortable, but that's because there's a potential that an employee who passed out on the street could throw up after being lifted up. Handling that kind of issue was problematic the previous year. But somewhere along the line, the towel became a little dirty, possibly from touching something. The secretary saw this and offered to bring another, but I turned her offer down. It's just a tiny spot on the corner, nothing to worry about. This towel should be plenty for someone who can't control their alcohol intake to the point of passing out on the street. I'd discipline any employee seen acting in such a way, but I wouldn't go so far as to fire them for it. In the cool night air, I thought back on the previous few weeks as I walked out of the pub while the secretary observed. The environment in the company was beginning to stabilize as the new staff settled in. There was less of a likelihood for significant problems to occur because there was no need to multitask between departments. At the year-end celebration, I was taking advantage of the unique chance to relax when I ran into someone I didn't want to see. The individual I had reconnected with in the reception area weeks prior stood in front of me. "Hey Alex, what are you doing here?" Brandon had come out of one of the local bars. Maybe his employer was hosting a year-end celebration as well. I wanted to shake my head in dissatisfaction at this coincidence. It appeared like he wouldn't let me ignore him and walk past. Talking about which, this is when your company does its year-end celebration, right? We follow suit. Is that accurate? Then why don't you go back inside? Stop acting that way. I just witnessed one of your workers collapse next to a neighboring fence. His remarks drew my attention, but I really wanted to cut the conversation short and walk away. Is that really true? Obviously. Will you not search for them? I looked at Brandon's smug, booze-stained face. I couldn't ignore it, even though it sounded completely suspicious. All right, thanks for letting me know. No issue. After all, we were employed by the same business once. I chose to search the neighborhood, reminding myself that I was doing this to protect my staff. I spent 10 minutes or so looking around carefully, and I could not find anyone who looked like our crew. Though I hoped the drunk employee had sobered sufficiently to return home, I was worried that they might have been engaged in an incident. Though I was reluctant to pry into their personal lives, I thought about giving those who had already departed a call to see how they were doing. That was when Brandon came over to me once again while carrying a beer mug. He stumbled over to face me, clearly drunker than before. I was back in front of the pub where Brandon had been before I realized it. Stumbling over to me, Brandon pointed and laughed. Oh, you really gave it some thought. That was clearly untrue. It seems that I had been tricked. A wave of rage was causing my fists to shake. Stop making jokes. I'm now really upset. Aren't you already furious? Fits you perfectly. Why do you have a soiled towel in your hand? Did you not find anything more tittier? You must be very poor. Huh. Regardless of my level of rage, I knew better than to use force. I was attempting to control my fury as I looked down as something cold flowed over my head. The beer that Brandon had been holding minutes earlier was the golden liquid. That's right, Brandon scoffed. Then Brandon pulled me into a tavern in the area. I got dragged so hard and collapsed into the pub. Glancing up, I observed that the place was crowded with middle-aged guys wearing suits, creating a loud commotion that flushed their faces. Brandon struck up a conversation with them. Come on over here, have some drink. This guy has too much conceit. Even worse, he dared to terminate me from my previous position. These were probably employees of the company that Brandon worked for. The men inside the tavern began to swarm around, grinning, in response to Brandon's call. They turned their beer mugs over in their hands, spilling the contents all over me at once. I got up, beer dampened, one after the other, feeling sorry for the confused bar owner. It was unlikely that Brandon and his gang would bother to mop up the mess on the floor. I apologized to the owner of the tavern and turned away from Brandon and his company, not even looking at them again. If I continued to witness their shameful actions, I might lose the will to resist hitting them. Brandon sneered, "This is to freshen up your poor-looking self." But I finally lost it shortly before I left the pub when I heard a mocking voice. I turned to say one more thing to Brandon. Then the deal for $200 million is off, effective immediately. What? I made the decision to drag Brandon to the brink of despair since it appeared like he was asking for his own demise. Standing there with his beer mug empty, Brandon swore foolishly at his own incapacity to realize how serious things were. I explained what I said in detail. The agreement is nullified. What topic are you discussing? My business and yours don't have a similar agreement. Is that accurate? How is your wife's business doing? No way. I had verified that the email from the year-end celebration was really from Brandon's wife a few weeks prior. I had heard about the scandal started by one of Emily's workers during that call. So as to save us any hassle, she begged me to get out of the $200 million business transaction. She gave the impression of being a real and decent person, despite her husband's actions. Benefits must always be taken into account in business, yet since humans are involved, emotions cannot be totally detached. I was conflicted about the circumstance and thought it would be unfortunate to break off our relationship. That's what I told Emily over the phone. Since you weren't the one who caused the scandal, once the commotion settles down, we'll look for the right time to resume our business deal. Even though I had to uphold the honor of my firm and sever relations right away, I made a commitment to pick up where we left off. However, the individual in front of me had never heard of such a discussion. I put an end to my memory and, speaking quietly, invited Emily there to explain the current circumstances. I also asked her to tell her spouse the truth about the circumstances. I aimed my phone speaker at Brandon. Pal, Johnson is correct as president. My company won't be able to deal with anyone for a while, so I was going to tell you later. It appears that we will be experiencing hardship for a while. I apologize. Brandon was stunned for a few seconds after hearing this, and then his face became pale. No, it's not possible. I take it you're kidding. Are you not attempting to mislead me? How could I make a joke about this kind of thing? Is this actually happening? When Brandon realized how serious things were, he shook and went to his knees, crying out to me over and over. I beg you not to end the business relationship with my wife's company. We'll be unable to survive. He begged, but none of what he said struck a chord with me. This was no laughing matter. Please, we used to work at the same company, remember? He just cared about himself and didn't even try to apologize for what he had done to my firm. There was no way to assist someone in that way. Without saying anything he would like to hear, I added, I might catch a cold, so I'll be heading back, and I turned to leave the area. When I arrived back at the year-end celebration location, My staff gave me startled looks. They questioned, "President Johnson, what happened to you?" The staff peered confusedly out the window, wondering if it had rained. A secretary who chanced to walk by would have recognized what had transpired by the smell of beer among them. She brought me another towel and then began to make cab arrangements for me. I felt sticky even after I changed in the bathroom after having someone buy me fresh clothes. I had no choice but to return home early in such a situation. Brandon approached me gasping for air as I stood outside waiting for the cab. "I'm glad you're still with us. Please don't cancel the business with my wife's company, President Johnson. I'm sorry if I poured beer all over you." In front of me, Brandon apologized once more. I had already made up my mind despite his attempts. Did he think my feelings would alter if I made an earnest plea? Brandon continued to say the same thing without looking directly at me. When my staff heard his voice, they went outside. "What brings Brandon here? You also brought up beer before. Would you not deny that you were the one who splattered President Johnson with it?" With contempt, they gazed at Brandon. This could cause havoc at the year-end celebration. I tried to go back inside so as not to disturb the happy employees, but Brandon grabbed my clothes from behind. "Please stay with me. Do you intend to leave me behind?" He was reprimanded by the staff as I considered my next move. "It's time to stop. How much difficulties have you caused our company with your actions?" "You're correct. Please stop causing us more problems. Even your face was too much for us to see again. Just vanish from our view right now." Brandon shuddered every time he was subjected to the verbal assault from the staff members, who were surprised to hear such things. He looked as though he was going to say something, but all he did was tremble his lips. His shoulders finally fell, as if accepting his fate, and he staggered off. I was overcome with fatigue as soon as he was out of sight. It did not seem likely that he would appear before us again, given his condition. I grabbed a taxi home after that. It seems the year-end celebration went on without any more problems, maybe because of my parting remarks encouraging everyone to enjoy the remainder of the celebration on my behalf. After receiving pictures from my secretary showing the staff having fun, I looked at the pictures and felt relieved. I was dragging my wearied body into the bath when my cell phone's incoming email notification went off. Once more, it was a message telling me that Brandon was back at Emily's house. Postponing my bath, I gave Emily a ring. "Hello. Do you have a moment?" My spouse just arrived home and gave me a rundown of everything. "It appears that he treated you and your companions rather badly." She seemed eager to take responsibility for her husband's behavior. The bad vibes I'd been feeling before started to fade as I imagined her honest face. "It's all right. It doesn't really concern me. However, I apologize if he interfered with your fun year-end celebration. Everyone still seemed to be enjoying themselves. I appreciate your concern." I was not going to hold Emily responsible. "I guess our company is completely disliked by yours now." "Not at all. My colleagues and I are aware that you are not at fault. Don't say anything like that, please." "I'm grateful. It eases my discomfort, even if it is only a white lie." It wasn't a lie, I reasoned, knowing that she might not accept it. She apologized so deeply that I was unable to think negatively of her. "By the way, I've been curious about something." I tried to change the subject by asking her a question I had been wondering about for a while, because I thought it would be unfair to force her to apologize any more. I asked why the conceited Brandon and the egotistical Emily, with their diametrically opposed dispositions, became a married couple. I questioned the decision of two people with radically different personalities to get married. "Well, that actually," Emily stumbledly admitted, "we didn't decide on the marriage ourselves. It was decided by our parents. Without taking into account their personal wishes, their marriage was arranged. Because their parents were good friends and believed that their kids would get along, they planned the marriage against Emily and Brandon's wishes." I was shocked by her narrative and thought, those are terrible parents. but it did explain how someone as self-centered as Brandon could exist. Emily looked set on getting a divorce from him. On the phone, her voice sounded relieved. I intend to start anew and restructure the business after my divorce. Could I please get in touch with you when we're able to conduct business again? Indeed, without a doubt. I'm excited for the day when we can collaborate with your business once more. She may have a lot of obstacles ahead of her, but I have no doubt that she will succeed. Regardless of how formidable the challenges, she possesses the strength to conquer them. After the divorce, Emily appeared to have severed her relationship with Brandon. It is said that he moved into her old flat, but his problems didn't stop there. An executive from the organization had witnessed the incident that night, which made Brandon feel uncomfortable at work. Through word of mouth, I find out that the other workers who poured me a bunch of booze are feeling the same way. Some received punishment or a demote. Brandon was downgraded to a regular employee position. He eventually had enough of the toxic workplace and left from the company, withdrawing into his flat. We've been having busier days as the business has grown, but everything is going according to plan. Our goods are selling well, and the recent hires are all dedicated workers who make major contributions. It's always a good vibe in the office when there's no troublemaker like Brandon. We were able to start doing business with Emily's company again after a year, by which time the scandal had healed Emily's company. I was excited to see her face again at the sales department business meeting. A long time has passed. I've returned to conduct business with your organization, as I previously stated. I expressed my gratitude that you were able to recuperate. We eventually started talking more and became friends as a result of that reconnection, which was a good thing. I discovered that as the workforce grew, I had more spare time. I used this chance to hone my clock repairing abilities and was eventually able to fix my grandfather's clock. I finally fixed the ancient clock. However, it took several days and was a difficult task. I talked to the clock, thinking of my late grandfather, filled with a sense of success. Grandpa, I finally got the clock to function again. Do you think you're keeping an eye on me from heaven? I'm hoping you can hear this clock's sound there. For the first time in decades, the sound of the clock ticking away seemed auspicious for the days ahead.